Hello, class. Today I want to share some very important information with you. What I'm going to discuss are the basic things that you need to know about to get your project started, which are the statement of work, the project charter, the work breakdown structure, and also how you plan to communicate with the various stakeholders that have an interest in your project. So let's begin by looking at the statement of work. There's three basic questions that need to be asked and answered. The first one, well, what is it? The second one is who creates it? And the third is what do you do with it? You may find something called a scope of work, which is also an SOW that is used, but the proper terminology is the statement of work. So this slide essentially takes the statement of work and it breaks it down in more detail. So you can see that it's an agreement. A lot of times it is an actual contract that's signed between the client or the customer and the contractor and the project manager. So the first thing to do to create a statement of work is you want to break down your project into various phases. And one thing to emphasize is that the statement of work should come from the customer. After all, who knows better what goes into the project or what the project should accomplish than the recipient, who is the customer. The next thing is to define the deliverables. So those are the outcomes of the project, what the project is going to generate, and the processes. So what sort of work is being conducted to bring those project those project deliverables into existence. It could be something that you do inside your company. It could be something that you automate inside your company. It could be manually done. It could be something that you outsource. So you need to describe the way that the deliverables will be generated. Then you want to make sure that you don't overdo it with the details. If you have a project with 1,000 details and it's just have something to do like putting in a fish pond in a backyard, that's probably over defined, but you want to make sure there is sufficient detail for the project manager to know what to do. And we talked before about the foundation that's required for a project, which is really coming from general management. So there's 5 things to keep in mind: planning, organizing, leading, controlling, and decision making. Now, number 5 has to do with assumptions. And if at all possible, you want to make things as clear as they can be. And there are some assumptions. For example, you may say that the economy is going to continue to be good for a particular project or it's going to be bad. So these are basically going to give a rationale or some reasons why things are the way they are. And then number 6 has to do with communicating all the elements of your statement of work. So we're going to talk more about communication in just a little bit. So why have a statement of work? What's the point? Well, let's just go through this diagram starting at the very top. The first thing is it's documented. So it's a permanent record of what the customer wants. And this goes a long way towards preventing what I call convenient amnesia. The next one, the gray circle, it helps in vendor management. So it could be that you want to put your project out to bid if you're a customer. So if you have clear expectations that are written down, then any capable project manager should be able to review that document, the statement of work, and know what needs to be done. Then we have a goldenrod circle. So that has to do with accountability. So the customer is going to be accountable for communicating what is desired. And the blue circle is really important. So all projects are going to go through change to a certain extent. So if you don't have written down what you want, it'll be very difficult then to determine what needs to be changed. The green circle there has to do with reducing ambiguity. So again, we don't want things to be vague. We want them to be as precise as possible. And the orange circle it sets the expectations. So there should be no questions asked about what is desired after the statement of work is created. So carrying on, here's some different boxes, and unfortunately you can't see the bottom right one, but if you just go to the unnarrated PowerPoint slides, you'll be able to see that. And so these are just some of the basic things in the statement of work, getting into more detail. So the location of work means where it's going to happen. Reporting, what sort of communication is going to take place. The timeline is going to identify when the project should start, when it should end, and then we have this green upper right box for payments, which basically talks about the financial aspects of the project. And then here's a template that has 7 different items. So now we're getting into more detail, and 6 and 7 are pretty important. You need to identify what is acceptable and what is not. When the project is done, the customer needs to follow this acceptance criteria. And then number 7 has to do with special requirements. So it could be that you only want your project to be done in the United States. So that would be something that you would include there. This example will be very helpful for your project, your group project. So this is a typical example of what a project scope statement or statement of work should look like coming from the customer. So I want you to study this and use it as an example for your project. And we even have more details about the statement of work. Now, the project scope, there's 2 definitions that we've talked about previously. The first one has to do with performance. So it's the different results that you're going to have for your project at different times. That's the first bullet. And the second and the last one there, the third bullet, is the boundaries of the project. So is the project going to take place at 1 facility, 10 facilities, or somewhere in between? So these are useful terms to know. Then we also have a checklist here that can help you with the project scope. I want to bring to your attention milestones. So a milestone is something that's going to help you know if you're on the right track. So if you're on a road trip and your GPS is not working, you don't have a map, you're on the highway in the middle of nowhere, you're always relieved when you see a sign that identifies your destination, like Tampa, 40 miles, to make sure you know you're on track. And the technical requirements here could be things like specifications, or let's say that if you are putting in that fish pond in your backyard, you want to have a special type of pump that's specified that relates to how frequently the water is turned over to make sure that there's enough aeration to keep your fish alive. Again, here's another example of a scope statement. So this has to do with building a home. So there's an objective, the description, and the deliverables. And then we also have milestones, technical requirements, and limits and exclusions. So this slide and the previous one are just examples of that checklist that we just saw. Now, scope creep is something really important that we're going to be talking about throughout the class. So all projects will tend to wander off their intended path to a certain extent. And this is because the project has never been done and it's very difficult to identify what it's supposed to do in 100% accuracy. So So you don't want your project to go off track too much because it could change so radically. So let's say that an extreme form of scope creep is where somebody is building a fish pond in your backyard and then it turns into a swimming pool. So obviously that's not something that you want. So the causes of scope creep, the requirements are not adequately defined. The user's not really involved enough to tell you what's really needed. The project is very complex. You're not documenting what the scope is desired. There's not good change control, so people could go in and change the project without getting formal approval. And gold plating down at the end, that's a term which means that you're doing more than what's necessary. So you only want to do what's required for the project and nothing more. Now, scope creep can also be something favorable. If it turns out that you can do more than it's costing you, then you should do it. And that's exemplified by the phrase that's here, where you are under promising and you're over delivering. All right, so the statement of work in an economic sense is demand. And then we have the project charter, which is a supply. So this is the response that the organization, the project management organization, is going to create. It's a document in response to the statement of work. And it gives authorization for the project to continue. So it includes things like risk, the business case, how the project fits into the overall strategy of the company, talks about how much money you're going to spend, who's on the team. And that last bullet point indicates that the statement of work needs to be a mirror image of the project charter needs to be a mirror image of the statement of work. There cannot be any gaps or discrepancies between the two. So the good news is, if you're a project manager and you have a really clear statement of work, it's going to be very easy for you to develop the project charter because it's really derived from the statement of work. So who creates it? The project management organization. What does it do? It's a response to the statement of work. And what are the elements? We're going to talk about those now. Now, just like what you saw for the statement of work, you can use this form to develop the project charter for your actual group project. So I would be very happy if you concluded this filled out form when you submit your project at the end of the class. And here's an example that you can follow. Now, when you have the statement of work and the project charter, you're then going to be able to create the work breakdown structure. And in my mind, the work breakdown structure, the network diagram, and the earned value performance measurement, they're the big three of project management. They're the things that project management has pretty much developed on their own. Everything else has been borrowed from other disciplines. So this is really a hierarchy of the project as it's being broken down into different pieces. And earlier I shared a slide with you for a stereo receiver that showed how it was broken down into the amplifier, the preamp, and the tuner, and then it's broken down into assemblies, components, and then parts. So that was an example. And it's showing relationships between different things that I'll be sharing in a slide in just a minute. But it enables you to create the schedule and also to assign responsibility and assign cost. So this is the hierarchy of the work breakdown structure. So you can see at level 1, we have the project. Then level 2 are deliverables. Then we have subdeliverables, lower subdeliverables. Then you have a cost account, and you can see that there's an asterisk next to that box, or that word in the box. This is coming over to accounting so that they can keep track of the charges for your project. So every work package, the last box there is going to have a code that accounting can then use to come up with the total hours and the total cost for each of the activities and also for the overall project. So how does it help the project manager? It assures that all the elements of the project are 100% identified. It also enables you to manage cost, time, and performance. And it also comes up with the schedule, the very last one there. So here's an example of a work breakdown structure. And this is for a tablet. So you can see that we have hardware at the top left. We have the CPU, the central processing unit. Then over to the right, there's another box for more items. We could put software there. So this diagram breaks down the CPU, the hardware, and then you can see at the very bottom, we have 8 boxes there, and the WP is the work package. That's what's going to go into your schedule, and then each one has a code that'll then go to accounting. So the work package is the lowest level of the work breakdown structure. It's short duration, so you should not have a work package that's going to last 100 days because that should be broken down to other work packages, and likewise you don't want one that's just 2 seconds. So the rule of thumb is 10 work days. I'm not a big stickler for that for a work package. It could be 5 days, 2 days, even 1. They should be independent where they can be managed individually. And it also is a basic unit to plan, schedule, and control your project. So the work package identifies the what, how long, the cost, how much work, who's doing the work, and also how well the work is being done. So that has to do with the control element. Now, there's some similar things to the WBS that you can use. One is the organizational breakdown structure. So this is taking the different resources in the company for the project and it's relating them to the work breakdown structure. And you can see that in this diagram here, which now we've expanded the work breakdown structure that we had before, and we are including resources which have codes that go along with it. And this basically just talks about the coding system. I want to bring to your attention the dictionary that's at the bottom of the slide. It can be helpful to have a dictionary or a glossary that can define terms in your work breakdown structure in your project that may not be familiar to everybody. And here's a different view of the work breakdown structure. So this is the indented view. And if you have a project that has maybe 1,000 tasks, you don't want to use the graphical approach with a bunch of boxes because you could see that that would just be really unmanageable. So it's a lot better to do an indented. And what we did is we took the tablet and we took the hardware, the power supply, and we could also put in the, I'm sorry, we have the hardware, the CPU, then we could have the software, and instead of having a bunch of boxes, we just have indented items that correspond to those top level areas. Now, if you have a service project, you may want to use a process breakdown structure, a PBS, instead of the work breakdown structure. The mechanics are the same, it's just different, and I'll show you what I mean. So here, for software, you can't hold software. It's basically just a bunch of electronic information in a computer, but at the top level, we have the analysis, the design, the construction, the test, and the rollout. So each one of those activities then can be broken down into other supporting process steps. Now, for your project, and I know that you've probably worked on many group projects, there's always some issue about who's supposed to do what and when. And a good way to overcome that is to develop a responsibility matrix. And when you work on your project, this is something that I encourage you to do at the very beginning, and also to include it when you turn in your final submission. So the best way to understand this is to look at an example. So here we have a market research project, and you can see all the tasks on the left. And we have 5 people working on this project. We have Richard, Dan, Dave, Linda, and Elizabeth. And so some of these team members are responsible for these tasks, and some of them are just being supportive. So all you need to do is just to put in an R or an S, and that's going to make sure that every one of your tasks has somebody who's responsible for and supporting if necessary. Okay, the last thing on the slides is about your communication plan. And this is so important because if you don't plan out your communication as a project manager, you're going to be spending so much of your time communicating. And they can be informal meetings. It could be a barrage of email messages. It could be hallway, parking lot conversations. So you need to answer these questions before you begin your project. So what kind of information is needed? And who's going to receive the information? How are you going to get the information? You may need to come up with new reporting mechanisms. What are the limits? There may be some confidentiality about that information. When will you communicate it, and how will it be communicated? So here's the steps to help you come up with those areas. Who are the stakeholders? What do they need? Where does the information reside? How are you going to communicate? And when? And in terms of how you're going to communicate, don't assume that everybody will accept text messaging, for example. Some people may want emails. Some may want a formal report. Some people may want a presentation. So you need to make sure that you're giving the type of information that is needed. And here's a diagram that shows 4 different types of stakeholders. So in the upper right box, you have a stakeholder who has high interest and high power. So you want to communicate with them abundantly, probably every day. And then in the bottom left, you're going to have a stakeholder who has low interest and low power. So they may be happy just hearing from you once a month, and that's it. So here's an example of the type of communication plan. So this would be something really good to copy for your plan or for your project. So that's what I had for you today. What I'm planning on doing is to continue to narrate slides for you from the course, and my plan is to use my in-class presentation of these PowerPoint slides and share those with you starting for the next chapter. So I hope you're doing well and that this information was helpful for you.